Hello and welcome back to Pokemon Violet. My name is Brendon Bigley. Today, the same day that this video is coming out, we've also released another episode of Into the Aether, a low-key video game podcast, largely focused on Pokemon Scarlet Violet, this very video game, believe it or not. Steven and I are coming at this from the perspective of being longtime Pokemon fans. He and I both picked up Red and Blue when they first came out, played them on the Game Boy, blown away. Pokemon continued to be like the pinnacle of Nintendo handhelds for a while. Gold and Silver like really blew the doors off most things on the Game Boy Color. Third generation on the Game Boy Advance was like absolutely unreal. And it was around, I would say, the fourth generation on the DS where things started to kind of get a little bit shakier and Pokemon kind of like lost its footing as like the tentpole release on all Nintendo hardware, which is kind of a weird thing because it still sells gangbusters, but you could tell that the franchise was slipping in a way. And a lot of people on the internet, and probably off the internet, have been kind of like rallying around all these different ideas of what Pokemon should evolve into. This idea of going and doing the 8 gym badges over and over and over again, I think felt a little bit rote eventually for some people. I was always kind of into it as like a framework to structure a more interesting game around. And I think there are different ideas in different generations that are fun and interesting. Very frequently, it came down to like, oh, now your Pokemon is bigger. Oh, now it can evolve again or something. But like take the 5th gen, for example, which I don't agree that it has a great narrative, but at least it was trying to have a great narrative. And I think that was an interesting idea. What does a Pokemon game look like where narrative is the focus? It's a cool thought and at least a differentiator from the previous generations. But this like grand idea of a Pokemon game in an open 3D world, you can use the right stick to move the camera. But more importantly, you can see Pokemon in their natural habitat. You can see a Psyduck go for a swim in a river. You can walk into a town and see people hanging out with their Pokemon of choice. That's like been the holy grail for a long time. This idea of this place that we all feel so connected to existing in like a tangible way that you can move throughout has kind of been the dream for so long. And Pokemon Scarlet and Violet very much should be the answer to that dream. It very much is the Pokemon Company like finally taking a look at this thing that everybody's been asking for a long time, looking at the hardware they have presented to them in the form of the Nintendo Switch and saying like, now is the time, we can do it. So if you've already listened to that episode of Into the Aether and you're coming here next, you've probably heard us kind of talking a little bit cyclically about how we feel about these games. We had recorded that episode about 2 days after the games had come out. At that point, I was probably like 6 to 10 hours in, somewhere in that vicinity. And I said on that episode something that I'll repeat here, which is that I think by the time I'm done with these games, they might end up being my favorites, which is like huge. That's a huge thing for me to say or even think is possible, considering my undying love for the 2nd generation and the remakes on Nintendo DS. Just absolutely phenomenal games. And the idea of anything unseating them seemed preposterous to me, really, until Scarlet and Violet, because it is doing so many things right. There's the big ideas, the open world, but there's even the small ideas, like what if the gym badges weren't the only things you cared about? Or even smaller ideas, like what if you just didn't have to worry about fly ever again? If you've been to a place, you can go to it at any point. You can fast travel to any point that you've been to on the map. There's even refreshes of old ideas, like the TMs, for example. Okay, they're no longer unlimited, and that's a little bit of a bummer, but they've been shifted in such a way where now you have to craft them, and to craft them, you need to make them out of materials you get from catching and encountering Pokemon, which then incentivizes you to go out into the world and catch and capture Pokemon. It all feeds into the central loop of, like, you want to collect all of them. You want to make your way through the world, experience everything it has to offer, look at every nook and cranny, and leave no stone unturned. There are really, really, really great ideas in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I think mechanically and from a gameplay perspective, it is a high point for the franchise and the bar by which we need to set it going forward. But when I say this, Steve and I were talking cyclically in that episode, what I'm referring to specifically is the fact that, like, it doesn't run very well, and frequently it doesn't look very good. And that's a huge bummer because this should be a celebratory moment, I think, for fans of the franchise, and it's not. If you go on your social media platform of choice and you look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet videos, they are, generally speaking, compilations of bugs that are like Bethesda, Skyrim, Oblivion level nonsense. And that's not the headspace you want to be in when going into a Pokemon game. You don't want to be like, will I enjoy this despite this? You know, that's never a good way to go into a new experience. I read the reviews before the game came out. A lot of them mentioned the technical issues, and I thought to myself, I am not a person who cares a whole lot about technical issues or performance. If it's not running at a locked 30 frames per second, I'm not going to care very much. As long as the vibes are there, right? Like, is the music good? Is there a sense of place and belonging in this world? Are the characters fun and interesting? Are you trying to tell a story that's even remotely more interesting than anything they've tried in the past, which is, speaking of raising the bar, pretty low bar for Pokemon stories. Wouldn't be too hard. I didn't think that the technical stuff was going to bother me, and unfortunately it like really does, because while I can forgive a lot of stuff, what ends up happening more frequently than not is I will find myself totally wrapped up in this place, in the Paldea region, in the team that I've assembled, in fighting all the trainers, in exploring every little piece of this island. And then I will be completely ripped out of that vibe and that tone by like a bizarre amount of pop-in, or just like a bug that forces the game to stop and restart so it can move me from point A to point B because it thinks that I'm stuck, but I'm not. Or the strange, inconsistent, variable frame rates of objects and people and Pokemon in the background. They all distract. And that's kind of the big thing for me, is that they all distract from what should be the most engrossing experience we've had in terms of this property, like ever. And those two things are really hard to find an equilibrium with, you know, like the equilibrium between I love this thing so much and I want to champion it and I want to talk about how cool it is, but also needing to say, like, this is not okay. You can't release a game that's this busted this late into hardware's life cycle, you know, especially if it is the tentpole franchise for the hardware. Like, Pokemon is the thing that moves units for Nintendo, and to rush an entry like this and to compromise it in this way is really sad, honestly. And all of that having been said, I am still playing the hell out of this game. I really am enjoying it a lot. Every once in a while, the bugs even do end up becoming comedy in a way that I would hope. But for the most part, I do find myself wrapped up in this place. I like the Paldea region. I love all the new additions. All the new Pokemon are like great, well designed. I love them. They're fascinating, and they're weird, and they're funny, and they're cool. I like the experience of running between all the different towns and exploring, and like every town is gigantic in this game. Every town feels like a feast. They're filled with restaurants and little like food markets and stores where you can buy different kinds of clothes. Like, they feel lived in some cases. A lot of the different towns have their own unique styles and vibes, and that's really cool. You have like a gigantic city filled with billboards, and you also have really small towns with like 5 or 6 houses in them, and you can tell that it's like a really tight community. And above all else, like, the story is surprisingly fun and good and interesting. The framing device of you as a student at this school, and the school's curriculum essentially being like, hey, you don't need to sit here and take classes. The most interesting thing and the most interesting way for you to learn is to just go out into the world and explore and find your own education. It's like, honestly, really cool. The idea that you can just go out into the Paldea region and do whatever you want, and that counts as your education at this academy, is like a really fun and interesting idea, while also allowing you at any point to go back to the academy and take a math class. Like, there is a math teacher in this game. You can take math classes, and you get rewarded for doing them, which is like nonsense and so funny. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are filled with big swings like that, and that's exhilarating. I love, and I didn't mention this on the episode, but I do want to shout this out. I love that also there's a variable age range in all of the students at this academy. I love that every once in a while you'll be out in the world and you'll find like an old dude, and it'll say like, this is a student. This guy is wearing the academy uniform, and he's out in the world doing the treasure hunt the same way you are. That's really cool. Saying like, yeah, education can happen at any age. Anyone can enroll here. Anyone can be a part of it. That's such a cool thing. This game is filled with so many cool things like this. And that's why I love it. And that's why I'm going to keep playing it despite everything that's going on here. All that having been said, I posted on Twitter and on Discord, and I said, hey, do you have any questions about this game, performance or otherwise? And I got a couple, and I want to go through them. And that's what this video is. Just kind of like a follow-up to that episode, and also answering some of these questions, some of which are serious and some of which are extremely not. But this one is from Marga, which, kind of feeds into what I've been talking about already. Marga says, I'm doubting myself about buying it. $60 is quite a lot for me, and the game looks real broken sometimes. Do you think it's worth it? I love the wild area in Sword and Shield, so conceptually, I think I'd like it, but the bugs are holding me back. Also because I've got an older Switch. I'm of two minds about this. So on one hand, like, I want to just say, like, if money was no object and it was just like do you think that this game is fun or not? Like, the answer is yes. I don't think the bugs, like, actually really hinder gameplay that much. I know I'm contradicting myself a bit, but even though I've had crashes here and there and some things that have pulled me out of like the vibe of the world, overall, speaking of that equilibrium between like how much do I love this game and how broken is it, I'm leaning more towards I love this game. And from all the people I've talked to who are playing it, that seems to be the case. And speaking of you having an older Switch, my partner is playing it on her Switch Lite, and seems to be really not having that many issues. I mean, like, obviously, like, the bugs are still there, the performance issues are still there, but like, she's trucking along and having a great time with it on the Switch Lite. I can't speak to that experience specifically because I have the OLED Switch, but I would say if you're like on the fence about it, removed from the $60 of it all, like, my answer would be yes. But when it comes down to, do you need to spend this $60 right now? Like, I don't know. I think that's a decision you're gonna have to make. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet will always be here. I do think there's something to be said for the fact that it's like a multiplayer game and you can play with your friends who also have it, and multiplayer games are best played around when they come out. At least that's my experience. I said that a lot around when Monster Hunter Rise came out, that there's no better time to like jump into a multiplayer game than right when it launches, because that's where all the excitement is, and that's when you can text your friends and say like, hey, do you want to jump into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet this weekend? And they'll probably say yes, instead of, 2 or 3 years down the line when they're like, oh, let me re-download it first. But also, if you loved the wild area in Sword and Shield, then yeah, I mean, this game is the wild area, but it's the whole place. And that's really cool. I think when Sword and Shield came out and everybody saw the wild areas, it was like, oh yeah, this is step 1, and step 2 is going to be the whole game is this, and like, spot on. That's exactly what happened here. This question is from Jackie. Has anything been game-breaking or ruining for you? I've only had 2 crashes at the moment. After playing 30 plus hours, and most of the lag I've seen has been in the background, but I know some people are having more issues. I can't tell if they're annoyingly funny or actually bad. I have had a couple crashes so far. I have also, as I was alluding to before, gotten into situations where the game will think that I'm stuck. Like if I'm like close to a mountain or a rock or something, it'll like freeze and then despawn me and spawn me somewhere, like weird stuff like that. But the stuff that actually gets to me, like I don't really mind that stuff as much as, I think one of the best examples is there's this one town where there's this like really prominent windmill. And when you walk into the town, the music changes, all the people are walking around. The whole idea is that this windmill is blowing around Sunkern, which is like a sunflower seed Pokemon that grows and evolves into a sunflower Pokemon. And it should be this like really beautiful, kind of quaint, almost like Ghibli adjacent scene. But unfortunately, because of the way this game works, the windmill is moving so slow. It looks like a PowerPoint happening in the background of this town. So this big prominent feature that is supposed to be like the thing that draws your eye and says like, oh man, what a beautiful place, looks awful. And that is the kind of thing that I bump up against. The moments where I'm ripped out of the immersion in those cases is where I think the game fails from a performance perspective. And these are things that can get patched. Like that's the kind of thing that you can patch, I think, eventually. But the crashes and stuff really don't bother me as much as things like that. I've had a couple instances where I've been out in the world and I'm like interested in or trying to go find a Pokemon and I see it in the distance, and as I get closer to it, it despawns. Like that that's not cool. Also, like that's the kind of stuff that rubs me the wrong way. Everything else, though, I can really put up with. You know, like I don't mind that the game kind of like actually slows down sometimes when things get a little more intense. Like that doesn't really bother me as much. And then some of the stuff is like just funny. And again, there are video compilations on the internet of bugs in these games that are like legitimately hilarious. This one's from Rob. What is your favorite bug so far? And it absolutely has to be the one where if you have multiple controllers plugged into your Switch and you move the left analog stick forward on all of them, you will run twice as fast. So if you have two controllers and you're pressing forward on the analog stick on both, you run twice as fast as you would have with one controller. That is like the funniest thing in the world to me. I don't know enough about game design to know how that happens, but I'm sure glad that it did because it's hilarious. This one's from Ponk. What's your favorite bug Pokemon so far? Which is a question I love. My favorite is probably Tarantula, which is like this little spider that has sad eyes, and it's covered in this what looks like a ball of yarn, and it evolves into this thing called Spidopos, which just looks like an old man who's also a spider, and that's great. I don't understand that evolution. I'm sure there's like something I could Google it and find out like what this is all in reference to, but I love it. I think it's great. This one's from Andy. Which of the three main quest lines have you been enjoying the most? So there are three quest lines in this game. The first is Victory Road, which is just like go do the 8 gyms. You can do them in any order. Very cool. I imagine you eventually end up doing the Elite Four at some point as well. Love it. There's another one called, I think it's called Starfall Street is what it's called in the game. And Starfall Street is you going out into the world and essentially like a Ubisoft open world game, like a Far Cry or an Assassin's Creed. I guess more like a Far Cry. Going and infiltrating the evil team's bases from this game. So in this game, they're called Team Star, and you can infiltrate their bases, and you have to take them out. You have to take out the leaders of each base one by one, and that is really fun and weird and cool. But there's a third quest line that I'm really all about that involves you going out with your cool friend Arvin, who is really good at camping and creating picnics and good sandwiches and very bad at battling, and he needs help going and finding this cool like glowing herb that grows out in the world. And when Pokemon eat this herb, they turn into like giant versions of themselves that are sometimes like more aggressive than usual. And you need to go out and fight these gigantic Pokemon, essentially like Gigantamaxed Pokemon, and get the herb for Arvin. And that's been my favorite thing so far. Because I think both, like, I like Arvin as a character. I think he's very silly, very cool. But also, every time you beat one of these things, it makes your traversal Pokemon more powerful or more interesting, or like be able to do more stuff. It's like the first thing you get, at least for me. I don't know if it changes depending on what order you fight them in. But for me, the first thing I got was the ability to like dash around the world or like ride my Pokemon faster. And that's really cool. I love that. That's, I think, my favorite one so far. But from what I do know, all three of these stories are going to converge at some point. I'm kind of excited to see where, why, or how that happens. Even if it all like goes to shit narratively, I still like the ambition of it. This one's from Rufus. With Arceus and Scarlet and Violet doing some real interesting things with the gameplay and story progression, where do you think Game Freak takes the series from here? I think this is a blueprint for a better version of this, which is maybe a shorter answer than I could give. But I really think that like Scarlet and Violet should have been the one, and unfortunately they're not. And I hope that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company and Nintendo take the time to allow these developers who are clearly so passionate about making a really great thing and give them the time to make the one that they want to make. They didn't quite nail it here, unfortunately. Maybe next time will be it. Now, the Arceus side of it is where it gets really interesting for me, because I think that the Legends series should and deserves to continue and is like a really cool swerve and a really cool spin-off franchise. I am pretty equally high on both of those games mechanically. Like Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, I think are both doing really interesting, cool stuff. And I think both of them feel like setups for great sequels. Arceus, to me, is definitely the best Pokemon spinoff like of all time, bar none. There's no, for me personally, and maybe somebody out there really loves Pokemon Stadium 2 or something, but But for me, it's like Arceus all the way. And if you had told me like, oh, they're not doing, gym badges and stuff anymore, Pokemon Legends Arceus is the thing forever, I would be thrilled by that. But we're fortunate enough to be living in a world where we get both, and that's really cool. And I want to see both continue. GJ asks, can you list the top 5 reasons Drill Dozer is better than Pokemon? I would have if you had asked about Pocket Card Jockey. Game Freak makes good games that aren't Pokemon. Matt asks, why are all the trainers ripped? The answer definitely comes down to the fact that if you read the Pokedex and take it literally, you need to be ripped to survive in a world where a Pidgeot can fly at Mach 5 and rip you out of the sky with its talons. Humanity should not be the dominant species in the world of Pokemon. We're very lucky that Pokemon love to hang out and specifically hang out in a Pokeball. Anyway, that's going to be it for now. Thanks to everybody who asked some questions. Really appreciate it. I hope you liked this video. I'll be candid. I'm recording the audio first, and I'm going to record the gameplay second, and I'm going to stitch it together and throw it up, and hopefully it'll be out in time for the episode. I've never done anything like that. Maybe it's cool, maybe it's not. I guess let me know in the comments. Regardless, I'm liking these games a lot. I have major issues with them. You can go listen into the Aether Loki video game podcast, into the cast.online. You can hear more long-form stuff, Steven included. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll catch you later. Bye, everybody.